Hello fellow muddlers, Bruce here again. In my last video, I was showing you an update on the rebuild of the Jersey Highlands Railroad, and in particular, the creation of the scene for the Bangor Slate Company, which is right next to my shoulder here. I decided to put a stream on the far left of that scene, so that as you came off the main part of the layout onto this shelf, you would see the locomotive cross across the stream and then into the Bangor Slate area. I have now cut through the foam and roughed out the stream bed for that stream, and the bottom in cutting the foam was pretty rough and the contours weren't quite what I wanted, but I never worry about that because I now reach for my favorite modeling medium, Ground Goop. And so it's once again Ground Goop to the rescue. Now I've done other videos on Ground Goop, and I'll put links to those in the description in the beginning of this video. But I thought it was worth an update because once again we're going to look at one of the greatest attributes of this Ground Goop, which is its longevity and storage. Because I tend to reach for this for many things besides scenery. If I am making coal loads for hoppers, I reach for this. If I am putting a pile of coal or sand next to a model, I reach for this. And I'll detail some of those uses at the end of this video. But in the meantime, I went to the shelf and I pulled off my Ground Goop. And my note on the top says I made this March 16th of 2016. That means it's coming up on 7 years since I made this batch of Ground Goop. That would put it back in the basement of my house in West Milford, New Jersey. And I hope it's still pliable today for my use as I create this scene for the stream and the rest of the Bangor Slate. Now I haven't opened this yet, so I'm hoping when I see this that it is indeed pliable. So let's open it and see. Before I do, I want to talk a little bit about how I store this, because that lends to its longevity as well. This is a Rubbermaid storage container. For this purpose, I don't think I'd use one of the dollar store storage containers. I want something with some substance to it and decent seal on the lid and so forth. So Rubbermaid, Tupperware, that kind of thing. So I'll show you inside what I do, but one of the last things I do is what the old, I think it was Tupperware commercials used to call burping the container. And that is you put the lid on, now you've trapped air inside, and when you're all done putting that lid on, you push down in the middle of the lid, which creates air pressure inside, and then you just lift up one corner, which is going to let some of that air out, and then reclap it. And that removes some of the air inside. So I always burp the container when I put it away. The next thing I do is right on top of the Ground Goop, I put a piece of saran wrap and push it down tight against the Ground Goop. The aroma of Ground Goop, which is primarily the aroma of latex paint. And now I hope that this is not solid as a rock. When you spread this out, if you spread a layer of Ground Goop out and you leave it dry overnight, when you come back in the morning, it's hard like a rock. So it's amazing that this stuff, when you cover it and store it the way I do, remains pliable, I hope. So putting in my, oh yeah, look at that. Pliable as the day I made it. Now the nice thing about Ground Goop is, if when you open your container, it has thickened a little bit. I mean, if it's hard as a rock, it's garbage. But if it's a little thicker than you would like, you can sprinkle some water on the top and then work that moisture into the rest of the goop. And to do that, I would start with a fairly stiff stirring rod, piece of quarter round molding is good and stiff. Paint stirrers, those wooden paint stirrers are usually too thin and will snap off. But anyway, start by putting some moisture on top and then just pushing straight in to work the moisture in. And then you'll get to the point where you can do some stirring and get that water mixed in. But this is almost okay just the way it is for the application I have right now. But I think probably I'll add a little bit of water to it and work it in before I get started on it. So yeah, and thinking about the title for this particular video, it jumped in my mind that I might want to call it the Magical Mystical Ground Goop. But I'll come up with something else probably just to draw your attention to it. But I cannot laud this stuff enough, I guess. And of course the idea was not mine to begin with. And if you look at my other videos, I give credit where credit is due. But I have stuck with this, and I will continue to stick with it through the rebuild of the Jersey Highlands and the Slate Run Railroad. And what I'll do now is I'll show you, how I use this. 2 years ago, as I said, I think I said, I used it last February of 2021 when I was building a structure. And I'll show you that. And then we'll take a look at some current work on that stream bed. I'll show you some up-close videos on that, and we'll wrap this up. Okay, talk to you soon. Okay, to continue. I told you the last time I used it 2 years ago was when I was building a structure. That structure is this Campbell sand house. And you might wonder how in the world you use ground goop, or why you would when you're building a structure. Well, here's one good example. First of all, let me just show you the model a little bit from different angles. I bought this kit used, and as is often the case when you buy a used Campbell kit, some parts might be missing, usually detail parts. And in this case, the container for the sand at the top of the tower there was missing. Luckily, a good friend of mine, Jim Massino, has a 3D printer, and he printed one up for me so I could finish this build. And I had to fashion my own downspout and so forth because that was missing too. But anyway, what did we use the ground goop for? Well, they want you to fill this storage area full of sand, and you don't want to, or I didn't want to, layer sand an inch thick here and try to hold it down with flooding it with glue. So I formed a foam base, and then on top of the foam I took my ground goop and just smoothed it out on top right to the contour that you see there. And while the ground goop was still wet, I just put a little brush of diluted white glue on top of it and sprinkled on some sand, and that's how I used it. I told you I use it sometimes when I'm working on rail cars like hoppers. What I'll do there is, again, start out with a foam core, and then to shape the top of the coal load, I'll use ground goop. So I use it quite often. All right, now let's look at what we are using it for now, more closely related to its purpose of scenery. Just move my chair over here and look. So I told you I cut the stream bed out of the foam. So it goes all the way through the top layer of foam and about halfway through the bottom layer. I have contoured the back roughly, very roughly as you can see, into a couple little steps which will be a combination of rapids and waterfall. Playing around with the idea of using ceiling tiles as the cliffs on the side of the stream bed there. Of course, this is just laying a couple pieces in for me to get the idea. I still have to shape them all and rough them up so they look like rock face and so forth, but I think I'll go with that. But now I want to coat this whole base right from the back out to the front with Ground Goop. And that covers up all that rough cutting of the foam and gives you a smoother base there. And I'll apply it with a painter's palette, not a palette, a palette knife, and smooth it out and get the way I want it. And if I want to put any rocks in there, let's see, here's just a little cast rock here out of plaster, which I would color first. But you just put it into the stream, into the Ground Goop, push it down, and it'll adhere fine. So again, another great use of Ground Goop. This is probably the bridge I'm going to use on this. It's a king post bridge that I scratch built many years ago and took off my old layout. I think it fits the scene rather nicely, and yeah, that's what I'm going to do next. So talk to you again soon. Love this Ground Goop. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like please, and as always, if you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Alrighty.